When are our property markets going to turn? What are property values going to be like in a year's time? When is the market going to bottom out? They're the sort of questions I'm asked all the time at the moment, with our property markets being in the slump phase of the cycle. And if somebody tells you they know what property values are going to be in 12 months' time, I'd be very, very wary and cautious, because the best economists can't get it right because there are so many factors involved. I'm not bad at telling you what the markets are going to do over the next month or two, because the factors don't change that quickly. And I think I've got a pretty good idea of what's going to drive our property values over the next 10 years or so. So in today's show, I have a chat with Ahmad Imam, Director of Metropole Properties in Sydney, and give you my thoughts about the major factors that are going to influence our markets over the next 10 years.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator, who has once again been voted our leading expert in wealth creation. That's the fifth time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
Where will our property markets be in 10 years' time? What will they look like, and what are the major factors that affect our property markets over that time? Now, they are the questions that we should be asking ourselves, and they're far more important questions to ask than taking a short-term focus and looking at the next hotspot or worrying about the banks and what the banks are going to be doing over the coming years. My name's Ahmad Imam, and I'm the Director of Metropole Property Strategists in Sydney. And who better to pose these questions to than Michael Yardney? Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Ahmad.
Michael, I'm looking forward to hearing your answers on some of these questions. I think it's going to be really valuable for not only beginning investors who are starting their journey, but also experienced investors who are wanting to take things to the next level. So what do you say we get started?
That sounds good.
So why don't we start with a simple one? What do you feel are the major factors that will affect our property markets over, let's say, the next decade?
Well, you were right in your introduction that at the moment, the papers, the media are focused on short-term factors. And while they're interesting and make news and clickbait, they're not going to, when you look back in 10 years' time, be anywhere near as important as, in my mind, three big trends: demographic trends, economic trends, and I guess the lower inflationary, lower wages growth, lower interest rate environment. So with the demographic trends, I think the big ones are going to be population growth, or in fact household formation, and then how we want to live and where we want to live, because that's changing. If you came back to Australia after a decade from visiting overseas 10 years ago, you wouldn't recognise the shape of our cities. So the question is, what are they going to look like in the next decade? The economic trends, I think, are also important, Ahmed, because we're transitioning from what used to be a manufacturing country and a resources-led economy to more a service-based economy. And that's going to make a big difference to the sort of jobs that we're going to have, the sort of jobs where people are going to have higher wages growth, which is going to allow them to be able to pay more for property. Years ago, we used to live off the sheep's back. And in fact, in those days, at the turn of the last century around Federation, houses in the big regional areas were as expensive as houses in Melbourne and Sydney, because that's where the high-paying jobs were, and it's changing again. So that's a trend we've got to look at. So we've got to look at where the jobs growth is going to occur, more importantly, where wages growth is going to occur, because obviously this is going to affect, firstly, where people want to live, but more importantly, where they can afford to live. But the big one, I think, Ahmed, is we're now going to be living in a different environment, one of lower inflation, lower wages growth, and that's got to lead to lower capital growth. If you look back over the last couple of decades, our markets grew really strongly on the basis of two things: falling interest rates. Even the last decade, at the time of the global financial crisis, Ahmed, you'll remember interest rates were 10%. Look where they are today. So there was this flow-on effect from lower interest rates that pushed up the ability to buy more, people could afford more, and also many households transitioned to two-income households. So that big combination of more affordability because higher incomes and lower interest rates meant property values went up. But the flow-on effect from lower interest rates, even though they're going to fall a bit more this year, isn't going to be anywhere near as strong. And I also think, looking forward, wages growth is going to be more subdued because some jobs are going to be lost to artificial intelligence. Other jobs are going to go overseas, things like manufacturing jobs. And this means many segments of Australia's markets aren't going to have the ability to pay more for properties. That means that in some locations, some segments, property values just aren't going to rise. Having said that, other demographic segments are going to still get significant wages growth, above average wages growth, and these people are going to be able to push up property values where they want to live. They're going to be able to afford to buy bigger houses, more expensive homes in better locations. So putting all these factors together, it's going to be very difficult to find properties that outperform the averages over the next decade. However, those who understand these underlying principles, they're going to be able to outperform the markets, Ahmad.
So, Michael, you mentioned the importance of population growth, and clearly we're growing faster than any other developed country, especially in the cities on the eastern seaboard. But it's been suggested recently that we should cut our migration levels. What would that actually mean for property?
Especially around election time, this issue always comes up. But in my mind, what's going to drive property values and our economic growth is two things. Population growth, or really household formation, because you want people to buy. I mean, adding a new baby to your household increases population, but actually doesn't increase the economy much or increase the need for dwellings. So it's really household formation, but also the wealth of the nation. And you need both. You look at some countries where there's strong population growth, but the people are poor, like in parts of Asia and parts of Africa. I visited Mexico a couple of years ago where the whole population of Australia was in the capital city, in Mexico City, but they were poor. So despite an undersupply of properties, despite household formation, values didn't go up. And then you look at other areas, countries that are wealthy, like Japan, but because it's an aging demographic and not much population growth, there's been deflation there for a long time. Over the last year, our population grew by close to 400,000 people, 395,000 people. And that's about 1.6% per annum. That's higher than any other developed country in the world. And yes, it is creating problems. And I can see why some people are saying, hey, look, we've got to lower migration. It's really easy to blame migration on all our problems. And you're a migrant, I'm a migrant, or your families were. And so we definitely know that migrants are what has driven Australia's growth, and this is in some ways a population. I go right back to the gold rush days, we've depended on migrants. And currently 60% of our population growth comes from overseas migration. And they've been the drivers of employment growth because they're coming because of the jobs, and also overseas students, which actually is an export industry for us. So it's easy to be anti-immigration. It's easy to blame immigrants. But even the Reserve Bank recently revealed that in their mind, migration and interest rates were the key demands for house drivers. And both sides of politics really know that we need migration. So yeah, they've fiddled around the edges a bit and they're lowering it a little bit, but really just back to almost where it's been anyway. But it not only contributes to household demand, and it doesn't just push out Australians from owning homes, it also contributes to jobs growth, because when these people come in, they're paying the taxes, by the way, that's actually helping our roads and our hospitals and our schools, but they also buy televisions and fridges and carpets, and that makes the economy go around. So I think the lower ceiling that they're talking about of immigration intake, it's 160. Last year was 162,000. It's a political statement. They're fiddling around the edges, Ahmed. It's really not going to make much difference.
Well said. And I've personally experienced the benefits of migration, myself, my family, some of my friends. But question, where are all these people moving to?
Well, after accounting for the concentration of migrants into our capital cities, and they're mainly coming to the capital cities rather than regional Australia, I know there's some talk about making them maybe move to regional Australia for a while, but that's only going to be for a limited time, and then they're going to come back to the big capital cities. By the way, Ahmed, way back, and you may not be old enough to remember, in the 50s and 60s, you're not old enough, when the Australians came, when they had a pound for a pom, and they brought the British people here, they made them move to Adelaide as well. That's where the Bee Gees came from, and I know you're into music. That's where Stevie Wright and the Easy Beats came from. So the British people who moved to Adelaide created some good music. But what happened once their visa time was up? They moved out of the migrant camps and they moved to the big cities. So that's just, again, fiddling around the edges. But they're mainly going to, if they've got a choice, to our big three capital cities. Melbourne's growing faster than any other capital city, around 2.4% per annum. And that means our population in Melbourne is going to grow by about 10% in the next 4 years alone. Sydney's the other big powerhouse. It's growing a little bit more slowly, but it's still growing very, very strongly. And more recently, more migrants are going to southeast Queensland. Sure, Sydney's losing some residents internally to New South Wales regional areas and to southeast Queensland. But in my mind, to answer your question going forward, the vast bulk of the population growth and the immigration is going to Sydney, Melbourne, and southeast Queensland, and particularly Brisbane. They're projected by the Australian Bureau of Statistics to have around 70% of the population and immigration growth. Why fight the big trends, Ahmad?
Okay, so while population growth is one driver, and a very important one for the very reasons that you mentioned, population growth alone won't create economic growth, will it?
Well picked, Ahmad. You need jobs for all these people. If people just came and didn't have jobs, we'd have the trouble that a number of countries in Europe are having with immigrants coming. But fortunately, we're creating more jobs, but more importantly, full-time jobs, and our unemployment rate's dropping. Unfortunately, we haven't actually been seeing wages growth. However, certain industries are going to benefit from the economic changes ahead. Last decade, it was the resources industries that benefit from wages growth. This time around, it's going to be more the service industries, including health, including education, including IT. They're going to grow more than other industries, and these jobs will be predominantly located in Melbourne and Sydney, and to a lesser extent, Brisbane and a little bit in Perth. And in general, these jobs in these industries that are going to grow over the next decade are going to be located closer to the CBD, where the economic powerhouses are, where the big industries are. People living to the big capital cities close to the CBD are likely to have more wages growth than the outer blue-collar suburbs. Now, again, this is not a judge of people. This is just a fact. Artificial intelligence is going to take some jobs, and others, particularly manufacturing, labour-intensive jobs, are going to go offshore just because of how cheap labour is overseas. Interestingly, the last census showed that in some locations, in some suburbs, incomes rose 40 to 50% more in certain municipalities than in general in that state. These people, those people with high disposable incomes, are going to spend more of their money. They're going to buy nicer cars. They're going to renovate their homes. They're going to upgrade their homes. They're going to buy properties in those locations, and they're going to clearly push up values. Those locations where those people are living are going to experience above average capital growth, Ahmad.
Now, Michael, we've got the Wealth Retreat coming up on the Gold Coast in June, and I know that you're preparing presentations as we speak for that. Are you going to be including information on or some further research on this type of information for the attendees?
Well, you're right, Ahmed, and that's the focus of what I'm doing at the moment. We're not only going to give the attendees the research that we're getting. We spend a lot of money getting research from various research houses. We're actually going to explain to them why we're doing the research and the thinking behind it. And that's why we've got 2-3 clever people, cleverer than you and me, who do that all day, like Pete Warch and Dr. Andrew Wilson, and our business partner, Cade Forbes, who loves digging into the research, while you and I tend to be more the big people. And that's why there's a good balance. So even though we do spend a lot of time talking about property, Wealth Retreat really isn't a property seminar. It's about creating lifetime wealth. It's about leaving a legacy. And it's aimed at already successful business people, property investors, and entrepreneurs. And I've put together the top faculty of property, tax, finance, business, economic experts I could. Tom Corley's coming back again from the United States. Every year he gets a standing ovation for his great research on rich habits and poor habits. I've invited Dr. Andrew Wilson to join us this year because the property markets are changing. and we need his in-depth information. Ken Race is going to talk about the many tax changes, but how to protect yourself, how to protect your assets, how to make sure that over the next while you moving forward, you minimise your taxes and maximise your income. Pete Wargent, a swag of property people, including yourself and our other property strategists. And actually, just before we started, I was having a chat with Joe, and already 25% of the people who look like they're attending are going to be return attendees. People come back every year. I've found many people who've come, they seem isolated in their wealth building journey. They want the stuff that's not on the internet, not in the books. They need to get to the next level. But they also need to have a peer group of people around them, like-minded people, especially those in business. So I thank you for bringing it up. I think we should actually suggest that viewers of this video, listeners to the podcast, go to wealthretreat.com.au and imagine how different you could be after 5 days immersed with that huge group of people plus more, because it's not just the people on the faculty. You learn from those you have breakfast, lunch and dinner with. So even if you're not an experienced investor, every year we have a couple of people starting off who need that kickstart, who I would have loved to have that when I started. So don't count yourself out. I know you got blown away the first year you came quite a few years ago. What did Wealth Retreat do for you, Ahmad?
It wasn't just the first year. I mean, every year I've gone, I've really picked up something. And you and I were just speaking yesterday, Michael, about the benefits of having mentors and unreasonable friends around you. And you've certainly been, an unreasonable friend to me. I don't think you're shy to tell me how it is and what I need to do as opposed to want to do. But that's what Wealth Retreat is for me. It's a place that I can go to once a year, hold myself accountable, have other people hold me accountable, start to work on my self-limiting beliefs, start to work on some of the excuses that I'm making, and start to put a plan in place for the next 12 months. I mean, it's really powerful, and I don't want to use the words life-changing, but for me, the first time it truly was, and every year thereafter has just been a way for me to continue on that trajectory.
Interesting. Only yesterday I was speaking to a lady who was wanting to come, and Ahmad, her words were, "I don't think I deserve it." It's so common what people say. It's not that she didn't say she shouldn't be there, because she actually already had quite a lot of wealth and a significant property portfolio, but don't count yourself out. Come along and join us at Wealth Retreat. Go to wealthretreat.com.au.
Yeah. Michael, any other demographic changes that we should be thinking about?
Well, household formation is one of the things we spoke about. On average, migrants coming to Australia are 26 years of age, but the average age of the Australian is 37. So the migrants are coming at a younger age, at a household formation age, at an age where they're getting jobs and paying tax. So it very much helps our workforce participation, and it's essentially a very big driver of our GDP, of our economy. And both sides of Parliament know that. So in the old days, there used to be an argument about a big Australia, small Australia. That argument's now gone. The question is, how big are we going to be? So one big demographic factor is our young migrants coming in. Another is our aging population. We've got more one and two people households, meaning the sort of property that's going to be in continuous strong demand moving forward is going to be very different in the future, with more people wanting to trade backyards for balconies and courtyards, more single people, more older people, more dual income, no kids, more empty nesters, more young singles getting married later in life. So the sort of dwelling that's going to be in continuous strong demand, which is the sort of property you need to grow at wealth-producing rates of return, is going to be different. Smaller average household sizes mean we actually, interestingly, also need more dwellings for the same number of people. So we're building too much of the wrong stuff. We're building too much of those high-rise towers, investor stock, things sold to investors, particularly overseas investors, as opposed to investment grade, because this cohort of people I was just discussing are going to, in general, want to live in the inner and middle ring suburbs, and some will want to live in the CBD, but in fact, most won't. The baby boomers downsizing and retiring don't want to go to town. They want the same hairdresser, they want the same dentist, they want to go to the same shops. So it's likely to be a bit more like we have in Europe for a long, long time, As I said, people are going to trade backyards for balconies and courtyards. And there's no doubt we're going to need more apartments, but the right type of apartment, probably more 2 and 3 bedroom apartments that families can be in, young families with kids, older families where they want a spare room for a TV room or the grandkids. And considering how many cars are going to be on the road, despite these self-driving cars, despite electric cars, I mean, you live in Sydney. You know what it's like. I know one of the advantages of the long commute is you can listen to the Michael Yardney podcast. but people are going to want to be close to transport, close to public amenities, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. It's a way of the future. I mean, we are in Sydney and the Melbournes. We're Manhattanizing. You know, we've got no more room to build out. We have to build up, and that does mean more cars. It does mean more traffic. But it means that it's even more important to have those transport amenities pretty close. And another factor to look into, Michael, is walkability. I mean, you can't underestimate the importance of having a good walk score. Being close to cultural amenities, transport amenities, schools, just being able to get somewhere by walking. But it's also important to note that, yes, if you have an apartment in a high density complex on a main road, it might have great walkability. We don't want that. What we actually want is to be in a nice, quiet, tree-lined street that's close to the hustle and bustle, just not in it. So you want to have a good walk score, but you also want to be in a nice, quiet street so you can enjoy that good lifestyle.
Good point, Ahmad. So I like the fact that all these new developments are occurring in the middle ring and inner suburbs because they're making the shopping centres more vibrant again. They were dying off, and now because there's more people there, there's more cafes, there's more gyms, there's more service industries there because retail isn't doing as well there. So I agree with you. I like being near but not right in the vibrancy of it.
Yeah, that's right. So just on that, Michael, what is Australia's future governments going to have to do to address this huge population growth?
Well, there's no doubt that the strong population growth is going to create a range of social and infrastructure problems. Our infrastructure is creaking at the moment, and then you can't just add another lane to the freeway. It's not going to solve the problem. And there's also town planning problems. Building more towers isn't the answer because they're building a lot of towers close to town. They're building towers even going to the outer suburbs now. But we're needing more in the middle, what I call the missing middle. Town planning regulations are going to need to change to allow us to build more appropriate accommodation, more townhouses, more medium density, low-rise density accommodation. The trouble is in the suburbs that need it most, we've got the NIMBYs, not in my backyard, or the notes, not over there either. The people are stopping town planning. But I see it is going to create some issues, but it's been handled well overseas. We're going to do the same here. We're learning.
Agreed. Michael, I want to talk to you about where you see the best property investment opportunities going forward. But before I do, if we can take a step back, you gave us a little bit of a teaser about Wealth Retreat on the Gold Coast in June. Can you give us a little bit more information and talk to us a little bit about the experiences that the attendees might have?
When you want to get to the next level of your investing or business, when you want to take your entrepreneurship to the next level, you need to get the right people around you, people who have already achieved what you want to achieve. You can only learn so much from books, so much from the internet. The environment of living with people for 5 days, the conversations you have over breakfast, lunch, dinner, morning, afternoon tea, that's what it's about. As I said, it's not just about property. In fact, many of the attendees are business people, entrepreneurs. They want to invest the profits from their business into property, but there's a strong emphasis on creating lifetime wealth and leaving a legacy. So, Ahmad, as you know, the theme of Wealth Retreat is where are you going to be in 5 years' time? And so I discuss about property, and Andrew Wilson will, but Mark Creedon, our business coach, will talk a lot about business, and Ken Race will talk about estate planning and tax planning and asset protection. Tom Corley is going to spend time explaining the success habits, the scientific research behind why if you do certain things, you're going to get certain results. Pete Wargent's going to take us into the future. Finance brokers are there to help with your finance. This is the sort of information that isn't in books. It's not on blogs. It's not on the internet. It's for business people, for investors, for entrepreneurs who want to create lifetime wealth. And there's a lot of time for one-on-one sessions. And it's interesting, you've seen it, Ahmed, people spend a lot of time talking about contribution, about legacy, about charity.
One of the things that I got out of Wealth Retreat, Michael, and that I found very interesting was the number of successful people there that had their aha moments in addressing some of their self-limiting beliefs. And some of these people were successful business owners or entrepreneurs, but it's incredible that every single person has those limiting beliefs there that they do need to unleash and they do need to address.
No argument about it. And it's interesting that people would wonder, they'd look in and say, a room full of already successful people, why are they investing 5 days of their time and all that money going there? But that's why they are successful people, Ahmed. That's why they are already successful in their property investing, in their business, in their profession, in their entrepreneurship, because they're investing in themselves.
Yeah, spot on. And they regularly invest in themselves. Okay, Michael, so a question that I'm sure a lot of the audience is waiting for. What are the best investment opportunities over the next few decades?
Well, we started off talking about what the big trends are, and they are the demographic trends, because demographics is going to drive our property markets much more than changes of government or changes in interest rate or the short-term ups and downs. It's going to be the economic trends, and also the lower interest rate environment. So in my mind, don't fight the big trends. There's no doubt there's going to be hot spots in the short term, but why fight it rather than go with the big trend? Because the 3 big capital cities, Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, are getting the majority of the population growth, the majority of the new immigrants, the majority of the new higher paying economic jobs. Now, there's no doubt that there's jobs happening in regional Australia. And I know people are saying invest in regional Australia. Many of those are seasonal, many of those are casual, many of those are part-time. Don't fight the big trends. And I believe that the middle and inner ring suburbs, particularly the middle ring suburbs, because most of the inner ring suburbs already have, are going to gentrify. And it's the changing nature of those suburbs. As older people are moving out, and newer dwellings are coming in, more expensive dwellings, more bigger floor plan apartments for young families and for older families, more townhouses. The gentrification is what's driven strong capital growth of properties in the past, and that's what's going to do it again. So you've got to look for areas where there's going to be wages growth, because you can't count on inflation doing it. You can't count on general wages growth doing it. So you can't invest anywhere. There was no doubt that a rising tide lifted all ships a couple of years ago. Not anymore, Ahmed.
Thank you for that information, Michael. It's always invaluable. We have to take a long-term perspective, and we have to get an idea of what actually drives the market when making decisions so that we can take a long-term strategy. Thank you also for spending the last 20 minutes watching this video. Please visit wealthretreat.com.au. We'd love to see you there, and we'd love to see your attendance. Thank you very much, Michael.
My pleasure, Ahmed. It's always fun having a chat with you.
Absolutely. Hope to do it again.
Well, I've just shared with you the major factors that I believe are going to affect our property markets over the next decade or so. The problem is there are so many unknowns along the way, and it won't be a smooth path. But having invested for well over 40 years now, I have seen the ups and downs. I've seen these downturns in the cycle, which are temporary, while the long-term uptrend is permanent for well-located properties. I've heard it over and over again that property values can't keep going up anymore. Having said that, because of the strength of our population growth and the wealth of our nation, I feel pretty comfortable that after this winter, autumn's going to come, and then another summer. It's happened season after season, and it'll happen again now. So if you got some benefit from our chat today, why not tell somebody about it by spreading the word, just like I'm trying to help you and the community become better, more successful property investors by seeing the bigger picture. Why don't you pass the message on to somebody and spread the word about the Michael Yardney podcast? And if you choose to leave a review, and I love it when you do, and I read it out, I'm going to gift you one of my books. So Sparrow left a review. So Sparrow, if you please email me, michael@metropole.com.au. I'm more than happy to gift you a book. And Sparrow wrote, Michael, your podcasts are full of great advice, well thought out and logically presented. It's a great tool to help educate my children about property investments. Thank you, Sparrow. Well, thank you, Sparrow, for leaving that great review. I'm going to now be bringing you these podcasts twice a week. They come out every Tuesday and Thursday because there's so much happening in our markets at the moment. I want to keep you up to date. But in between, if you'd like to keep up to date, subscribe to my Property Update magazine, propertyupdate.com.au. You get a newsletter in your inbox every morning with expert advice on property investment success, money, finance. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon. In the meantime, spend your time wisely.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property advice. If you got value from today's show, we'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review, and we'll read it out on a future show, and Michael will gift you one of his books as a way of saying thank you. Just go to michaelyardneypodcast.com/review and let us know what you think. If you don't already subscribe, head over to iTunes or your favourite Android app. You'll find us there as Michael Yardney Podcast. If you'd like to gain instant access to the show notes, head across to michaelyardneypodcast.com. Watch out for our show next week. You'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes.